Welcome back to another dark and disturbing chapter here at GraveyardDance.com. We've covered some really dark, twisted and screwed up in the head individuals over the last year or so, and this week's subject is right up there at the top of the list for being the most sick in the head of almost anyone we've ever covered. How anyone could do the things he did to innocent, unsuspecting women who had their entire lives to look forward to is beyond me. Before we go into all that though, I hope you'll help a brother out and take just a second of your busy day and hit that like button and subscribe too if you like the kind of content we cover. It would mean the world to me if you'd do that to help me out. Now, on to today's story. Ted Bundy was an American serial killer, rapist, and necrophile who terrorized the United States during the 1970s. The first two things I just mentioned was bad enough, but that third is just vile. He is known to have murdered numerous young women and girls, and his exact victim count is still debated among investigators and experts. Ted was born Theodore Robert Cowell on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. His mother, Eleanor Cowell, was unwed and teenage pregnancy was considered taboo at the time. She placed him up for adoption, and he was raised by his grandparents, who legally adopted him when he was 3 years old. Most authorities believe that Bundy's killing spree began in 1974 and lasted until his arrest in 1978. He targeted young women with long hair, often approaching them in public places and faking an injury or disability to gain their trust. He would then abduct and murder them, often leaving their bodies in remote areas. Bundy abducted Linda Healy, who was just 21, from the University District of Seattle, February 1974. She was taken from the main campus of the University of Washington. She was known for giving the weekday ski report on the radio. After he abducted, abducted, and strangled and assaulted her, he left the body where it would easily be found. Many believe she was his first known victim. By March, only a few weeks later, he was back at it again. He then kidnapped and murdered Donna Gail Manson, who was 19, a student at Evergreen State College in Olympia. Her body was never found. Just a few weeks later in April, he'd find another unfortunate young woman. Susan Elaine Rancourt, an 18-year-old, would be the next to die at his hands. She was a student at Central Washington University in Ellensburg. By May, only a few weeks later, Bundy abducted Roberta Parks. Jo went by the name Kathy. She was 20 years old and from Oregon State University around 11 p.m. He claimed to have assaulted and killed her at Taylor Mountain, more than 25 miles southeast of Seattle. By June of '74, Ted was killing about once a month, and he didn't stop by then. On June 1st, Bundy abducted Brenda Carol Ball, who was 22, in the town of Burien, south of Seattle. Her skull was later found at Taylor Mountain. That same month, on the 11th of June, he kidnapped and killed 18-year-old Georgianne Hawkins from the University District of Seattle. In an interview with King County Sheriff's Office Detective Robert Keppel, he claimed to have knocked her unconscious and strangled her. In July of 1974, on a beautiful summer day at the popular Lake Sammamish, Bundy abducted 23-year-old Janice N. Ott and 19-year-old Denise Naslund. Witnesses described a handsome young man who called himself Ted. Police were beginning to identify Bundy's strategy of luring women by wearing his arm in a sling and asking for help. In September of 1974, a hunter discovered the remains of Ott, Naslund, and Hawkins, 1 mile east of an old railroad trestle just outside Issaquah, Washington. By October, his next victim was just a 17-year-old girl whose life had only just begun. Bundy abducted, assaulted, and strangled Melissa Smith from Midvale, Utah. Her body was discovered a week later. That same month, he killed another 17-year-old teenager on Halloween. He assaulted and murdered Laura N.M. from Lehi, Utah. Her remains were found that Thanksgiving Day in a mountainous area. November 8, 1974. He attempted to abduct 18-year-old Carol Durange at the Fashion Place Mall in Murray, Utah. He posed as a police officer. Luckily, she was one of the very few to ever get away. She was able to help police with a description though. Later that night, just after 10 p.m., Deborah Jean Kent's father gave her the keys to the car to pick up her brothers from a skating rink. She never got to her parents' car. She was just 17. Bundy claimed in an interview with Salt Lake County Sheriff's Detective Dennis Couch that he left her body in a grave, but her body has never been found. January of 75. Ted abducted 23-year-old Karen Eileen Campbell from the Wildwood Inn in Snowmass, Colorado. 36 days later, her body was discovered 3 miles from the inn with evidence of blows to her head. On the 1st of March, while Bundy was in Salt Lake City, Utah, the remains of Healy, Rancourt, Parks and Ball were found on Taylor Mountain in Washington. Their skeletal remains showed they suffered severe blunt force trauma. March 15, 1975. This horrible monster abducted and killed ski instructor Julie Cunningham, who was just 26, from Vail, Colorado. Her body was never found. In April, he killed Denise Lynn Oliverson, 24, from Grand Junction, Colorado. He said he left her body in the Colorado River and it has never been recovered. In May, Bundy kidnapped and drowned a 12-year-old child, Lynette Dawn Culver, in a bathtub, then later said he discarded her body in the Snake River. Her remains have never been found. Just a side note here. Hearing about any female dying at the hands of a killer breaks my heart beyond paces, but Lynette was just 12 years old. I have a daughter the same age, and to even think about something like this is almost too much for me to bear. There is literally not a place in hell that is hot enough for this guy to spend his eternal days, in my own opinion. By June, he killed another young teenager who was only a couple of years older than the last one. Bundy kidnapped and killed 15-year-old Susan Curtis when she was attending the Bountiful Orchard Youth Conference at Brigham Young University. Bundy claimed he buried her body near a highway, but her remains have never been located. July was the first month in a long time that he hadn't murdered anyone. Maybe he did and we just don't know of any, but let's hope that's not the case. By August 16th, his luck was starting to run out. It was the first time police had arrested him. In Granger, Utah, after a chase by Highway Patrol Officer Bob Hayward. Police found masks, gloves, rope, a crowbar and handcuffs in his car. He was released on bail the next day. Personally, if you get caught with all that, do you really think bail should be given? I think that it would be too much a risk to the public myself. If you have all that in your car, you can't be up to any good. In October, Bundy was identified in a lineup by Carol Durange, whom he tried to abduct in November 1974. Bundy was arrested and charged with the aggravated kidnapping and attempted criminal assault of Durange. By that February, Bundy's trial began. He waived his right to a jury trial. On March 1st, he was found guilty of aggravated kidnapping. He was sentenced to a minimum of 1 to a maximum of 15 years in a Utah state prison. The killings had stopped and all was peaceful for the next 8 months. That October, Bundy was charged with another murder, that was of Karen Campbell's murder. He was serving a maximum sentence of 15 years, but that number on his time card was quickly going up. By that January of 1977, Bundy was moved to Aspen, Colorado, to face charges for Campbell's 1975 murder. That May, he pleaded not guilty to Campbell's murder. Bundy wanted to assist in his own defense, and was allowed to access the Pitkin County Jailhouse Library. He managed to escape from the second-story window of the library, 25 feet above the ground. Thankfully, he was caught 5 days later, after spending that time in the nearby mountains and back in Aspen. He went back into custody at a facility in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, and on June 15, 1977 he was charged with escape, burglary, and felony theft. That jail time was adding up like calories on Cookie Day. Just shortly after, in December of 1977, Bundy escaped from his jail cell through a light fixture opening in the ceiling. He stored books and other belongings on his bed below a blanket to appear as if he were in bed sleeping. This is why I am a supporter of capital punishment in some cases. Some people are just too dangerous to live among or be in society. His right to live doesn't quite mean as much to me as his victims, women who had everything in life to look forward to, and that is especially true of the really young ones who were just barely above being children. After escaping, he flew to Chicago, then took a train to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and drove a stolen car to Atlanta. Bundy arrived in Tallahassee, Florida, by bus. January 15, 1978. At 3 a.m., the women who stayed at the Chi Omega sorority house near Florida State University were all in bed asleep. There, they thought they were safe and secure in their rooms, and they should have been, had it not been for the shit stain on society known as Ted Bundy. He broke in early that morning as the women slept and murdered Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy. They were both beaten severely and strangled to death. He was sadly just starting though. Karen and Chandler and Kathy Kleiner suffered horribly severe injuries after Bundy bludgeoned them while they slept, but they did manage to survive. Her sorority sisters lived on the other side of the wall from Debbie Ciccarelli, and Nancy Young heard the noise and called Thomas's apartment, but she didn't answer. Ciccarelli and Young then called police. Bundy escaped before authorities arrived. Thomas survived the attack. After escaping, he would be up to his dark deeds just a month later, just like clockwork, and sadly, another young woman would die, another 12-year-old child named Kimberly Leach. She was a junior high school student who disappeared in the middle of the school day. Leach was one of Bundy's youngest victims. It was also, thankfully, his last murder. Before we go on, we need to take a moment to tell you about Eyes of a Dog. EyesOfADog.com is a website that helps anyone in the United States find a pet adoption center in his area. It's 100% free to use, and its sole goal is getting these poor sweet creatures out of the shelters and onto a comfy dog bed by your favorite place to relax. One of the reasons why I chose to mention Eyes of a Dog site today is because in shelters all across the country, there are dogs and cats of all shapes, sizes, colors, and breeds that need our love and attention. But when it comes to scary predator types like Bundy, do you think these girls, at least some of them, could have been saved if they had a big scary trained guard dog or two with them when he came knocking? You can imagine the look of shock and surprise when some dude breaks into your house in the middle of the night, only to get a piece of his behind removed by an angry Rottweiler. Sometimes, we need them just as much as they need us. Go to EyesOfADog.com, click your state and then city or town to find the nearest rescue adoption center nearest you. They also have a lot of videos on their site that can be very helpful when it comes to which breeds are the best to have and all other types of pet-related topics. Again, that's EyesOfADog.com. Now back to today's story. Bundy was arrested in 1978 in Florida, where he was charged with multiple murders. He was later extradited to Colorado, where he was tried and sentenced to death. He was executed by electric chair in Florida State Prison on January 24, 1989. You'd think that this would be the end of the Bundy nightmare, but not quite. In the late 80s, there was a horror movie that came out called Shocker. It was about a guy named Horace Pinker who was a deranged serial killer, and once he was put in the electric chair, and in the great words of Metallica, he rode the lightning, so to speak, it was very shortly that he came back to life and started killing again. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. Absolutely great movie with a killer soundtrack. I think my favorite track on there was by a band called Soraya, and the song is Timeless Love. If you like rock ballads, it's a beautiful song. I'm getting off the subject though. Ted Bundy didn't come back to life as in a real-life body where you could see him or he could hurt anyone, but in the room of the prison where he was killed, his ghost was being witnessed by so many correctional officers that it scared many of them into quitting. It's rumored that the warden or some of the prison's higher-ups have warned everyone to keep their mouths shut about Bundy's ghost, but a few still spoke out. His ghost has been spotted in his cell, in the room where his chair was that he died in, and in various parts of the prison. He's said to still have that evil stare and maniacal laugh, even after death. Yeah, that would be a huge no thanks for me. Can you imagine running into this guy after he was fried? No, just no. Anywho. One point I forgot to mention earlier was that Bundy had a particular type that he always went after. It seems early in his life, Ted had a girlfriend with whom he was madly in love with. She ended up leaving him. Some say it was because he lacked ambition in her eyes, but then again, maybe she could just sense that this guy was batshit insane. Either way, he went on to only kill women who reminded him of his ex. Either way, it was no excuse for what he did. People all over the world get their hearts broken. Everyone either has or will at some point in their lives, and they don't do what he did. Bundy was known to be charismatic and intelligent, and he used these qualities to manipulate and deceive his victims. He was also known to have a fascination with the occult and Satanism, and some experts believe that these beliefs may have influenced his crimes. Some experts also believe that Bundy suffered from a personality disorder, such as narcissistic personality disorder or psychopathy, which may have contributed to his lack of empathy and impulsive behavior. Bundy's crimes and persona have been the subject of numerous books, films, and documentaries. Some notable examples include the film The Ted Bundy Film, 1980, the documentary The Bundy Murders, 2008, and the book The Stranger Beside Me by Ann Rule, who was a former colleague of Bundy's and wrote a book about his crimes. Ironically, they worked at a hotline that I can't mention the word itself without getting a video banned, but it was basically a self-harm prevention center. Seriously, think about that for a moment or so. Anywho, his exact victim count is still unknown. He was executed in 1989, and if I may say so myself, good riddance. His crimes continue to fascinate and horrify people to this day. So, if you like today's story, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this tragic and horrifying case. It'd be even more great if you subscribe to my channel. Seriously, I love seeing the number go up 1 or 2 at a time, so throw me a bone already. We appreciate y'all. Till next time, thanks for watching.